Welcome to the Ideal Spaces Working Group podcast.
Podcast from Ideal Spaces. I'm Ulrich Gehmann, and together with Grant Rainham from Ideal Spaces, we will make a podcast today with Ron Cox. Could you please introduce yourself, Ron?
Well, hi, good morning, gentlemen. I'm Ron Cox, and I am really an entrepreneur, an old spirit, and author. I've wrote a couple books involving building communities, whether it's in a local town, it's a physical layout of a community, or if it's corporate America and growing teams. And so I appreciate you asking me to join you today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Okay. As regards your experiences you could gain with building up communities, what have been your main issues after all as regards critical success factors, what it needs to build up a community and what it needs to sustain a community after it has been built up?
That's a great question. I think from my experience, what I've learned is great community is going to require communication. It's going to require people that are of integrity. It's going to require people who build a trust, people who show up and want to collaborate. So I think the greatest success stories that I've seen, experienced, and been part of has really been people who have showed up, trusted in each other, had open lines of communication. One of the things we always talk about is that our Creator created us with one mouth and two ears for a reason. So be humble, be willing to listen, be willing to learn, and really draw in and encourage communication from all parties involved who will be impacted by the outcome.
I mean, are you finding, in building community in the communities you're involved with, are you finding that that formulation of communication and, let's say, collective consciousness or people working together, dialogue is working as well as it did, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago?
I believe that today there is greater access to information and data than I had, obviously, in my younger years as a young professional. So I think that the success can come very quickly, but with that, you can also experience failure extremely quick. And so I think having access, you and I, we both live in a world that there's no borders any longer. There's no information that can't be obtained. So whether you're working in the darkness or the daylight, all that information is going to be readily available. So I think that could help you accelerate your decision because you can find out more information about people much quicker. So I will tell you also with that too, there's been a lot of people who have showed up with the mindset, where, and you're going to have this in all communities, but where they're divisive. And we always used to jokingly say some people just get up mad for some reason. That's not going away.
Yeah. I mean, in building community, which, I know you've built a few communities. I mean, what would you list as, let's say, the most important aspects into community building?
The desire to have a shared outcome that we can all be able to take responsibility for, and we can hold each other accountable. So I think it's a mindset that we create with those people that we surround ourselves with.
Yeah, and basically today, in our podcast and talking to a lot of people, young people have a little bit of a different mindset, majorly because of also the existence of if we could call it the new outer world or the pseudo outer world of the tech world, the social media world, and therefore they don't seem to socialize. They seem to be isolating themselves a little bit more than before. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. I think with especially in younger development of the brain, where we're dealing with a lot of kindergarten or K through 12 students who are, the brain is trying to develop with that. You have emotional intelligence. You also have the ability to deal with others. You have the ability to communicate. And so I think as that brain develops, my opinion is that you have to have that in a shared environment where people can communicate more effectively. To me, effective communication comes along with nonverbal. And so in my experience, I would say 75% of our communication is nonverbal. It's hard to have that nonverbal experience or shared experience with others when you're in isolation and you're alone and you're sitting there in your home office or in your living room while others are trying to communicate more effectively and overcome some of those barriers. It's difficult to do when you're not in a shared space.
Yeah, that I can understand. Have you seen, let's say in young people, let's say 14 to 22, that area, we've been talked a lot about this isolationism, or also because they have this new pseudo self, this new pseudo world through the social media, besides the outer world that we're all used to. Do you see that the isolationism can lead to depression and then a little bit of a narcissistic view, not towards themselves, but more towards the society that existed, sort of like putting the blame on everything there because of like maybe low self-esteem. And then maybe what seems to be coming is a little bit of a nihilistic point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said is it's spot on. With that brain development and that isolation can lead to depression, lack of emotional intelligence, inability to overcome adversity, and inability to effectively communicate. And so when you have all those components, all those are negative factors to a desired outcome. And so I think that is even greater enhanced, and especially with younger people who don't have that experience. Older people who have come from different cultures, different environments. Maybe it's a different work group, it's a different community. You and I had talked previously about how a lot of youth and parents kind of blend together through youth organizations. Developing a youth organization so that your children are encouraged to participate in an activity together. Parents are encouraged to communicate, and it creates a trusting culture too, where everyone wants the best for their child. Everyone wants the best for that, team or organization or whatever they're a part of. So they have that shared responsibility, and everyone wants to help each other grow and their families. And so you surround yourself with that family and you have that mentality that, hey, we want to see each other have success, and we know what that is. We define that together and we get to experience it.
Yeah.
As regards success and real communities, let's call real communities are the communities in the analog world, the old world, where you really meet people physically, so what we have been used to. When we look at these kind of communities, one is about the point of disturbance, the relation between resilience and community.
Yeah, I think for me, and I talked a little bit about this in my book, Unbroken Community. And so for me and the stuff that I had personally overcome throughout my life, I share that experience, whether it was, brought on by my own family, brought on by the people I chose to surround myself with, the organizations I joined, the school I was assigned to. I think the resilience part of it is because of the learning and that happened. And at some point in time, I always look back and there really was three things that I could think of. And first of all, it was at critical times when there's lack of communication or issues. It was a family member that drew me back in. In my case, I was able to meet a young lady, Raquel. We've been together, ever since I was a teenager. And so I found that person that I could share those stories with, those adversities, and we went through those together. My grandfather, who is a veteran who was in military combat, he had tough decisions where people live, people die. He had to make those literally life decisions. And then my nephew, who was a great young man. And so he brought me back into that. Hey, here's what the perspective is. Here's my point of view. And I had so much trust and respect for him as a younger adult. So I think the three things for me is find your right family member that you can openly communicate with, especially in times of trial. Surround yourself with good mentors, people that you look up to, that you trust. If I'm in a room, and I found this out, if I was in a room and surrounded myself in a community of people where I was the smartest person in the room, then I was in the wrong room. And so I needed to be inspired. I had to learn from others. I have to see how they behave. I have to see how they react. So find yourself those mentors. And then finally, you got to get in with friends that you don't feel uncomfortable sharing your adversities, your problems, your trials, your tribulations. And here's how you came out on the other side. So I think, I have this weird term, I call it my tribe. So my tribe is my community. And I've also empowered the tribe to hold me responsible. If my words and actions aren't aligned, then let's talk about that. And I want to have that safe space and that safe community so they can hold me accountable. I need that.
Mm-hmm. These relevant points, as anthropological relevant points. When we look at the existing overall situation, the urban situation in that sense, the majority of people today lives in large urban agglomerations. And when, let's say, when a tribe, or in a positive sense of it, a tribal mentality is needed to sustain a community, what to do in these large masses of people, of urban agglomerations, where you feel more or less alienated very often?
Well, you're right. The groups are getting larger. People are, coming back together, and you have to blend those personalities. And I think, for me, you have to make a decision that this is the group I'm going to be a part of. And again, I look at it from a tribe standpoint. And you got to look at too, wherever you decide and wherever you lay your head at night, and these people that you associate with during the day, there's two things that can happen. A, they're either going to lift you up, or B, they're going to bring you down. And eventually you're going to become part of that. Good reputation, bad reputation, because you're going to be put in a category of, I live in this and I'm associated with those. And so I think that happens very often, especially in larger groups.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the let's say the current political, socioeconomic situation that exists, do you see that the concept of collective consciousness still is a part of community and society, or are we losing that?
I think that I think we did lose that throughout the world pandemic. And I think that it is slowly starting to come back and rebuild. But I think it's going to take a mentality of, you got to have people who are really set aside their egos. Because a lot of times right now, people are stereotyped by a community, by a voice, and that ego. And unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately, it seems like the loudest voice are coming from the politicians who actually need or want something from you. I have more respect for the community leaders who aren't necessarily holding that public office, and they don't need a title to have a positive impact. They lead through actions, not through words. And to lead by actions, you got to be down in the trenches with your people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, do you think, like, with the current condition, let's say the current human condition, if I can use that term, with the concept of like news versus fake news and the usage of fake news to infect people, do you think that humans, individuals nowadays, or in the near future, will have the ability to disseminate between what's correct and what's not?
Well, I hope so. I'm struggling with that myself personally with AI. You know, I know that AI is going to be a good tool when used appropriately to help people do the right things and make the best decisions, whether it's healthcare or anything else. But bad, evil people with a bad mindset is going to empower them far faster, far greater, and give them far more responsibility, or irresponsibility, I should say, that could have a huge negative impact. So I think the governance side of it is going to have to also be developed so that we can hold people, accountable, and we could restrict access to certain data. Things that really scare me, obviously, is the access of AI to get into people's personal lives that can impact either youth, minor, or on the other side, adults that have financial responsibility, like account numbers and things like that. So easier access to more greater volumes of data for bad people, that is a primary concern of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think, if we can refer back to the younger generation today,
Yep.
Do you think that they have a identity problem?
I think some do. And the issue again is because of the isolation and not hearing shared experiences, shared stories. One thing about being able to share a story and having that conversation and being present is the fact that stories, in my opinion, they build trust, they build empathy, they build connection, and they build purpose. And if I could share my story and I could have a positive outcome and I could build trust, empathy, connection with others, and give a purpose of this is who I am and this is what I do, I think you can inspire others. And I think that's a very good thing and very powerful tool to have.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we can shift a little bit, humanity, the concept of being humane. Again, we look at our systems today in the United States, Europe, let's say in the Western world, if we can sort of put that as the group. And we basically see that, with the current socioeconomic pressures, with the political pressures, with the shifting environment we're in, do you think that humanity can survive?
I don't want to get too deep into my faith, but I have that question every day, and I open with my prayers, and I pray that very thing. I want to say that what matters most to me is human connection and having that human connection. And I ask for my day to have a shared experience that I can share with others, that I can positively impact that outcome. And I genuinely care about my fellow humans. And I want to ask that question, what's my purpose and how can I help? If I can align my passion and my purpose with the right people, and we can come together as that tribe and influence others, I think we have a great chance. But we have to close the tablet, put down the phone, and have genuine connection.
Yeah. Totally agreed. I mean, for you, for Ron, how do you see the future? I mean, in the projects you've done before, you seem to have done some wonderful work in community and in groupings and dialogue and interconnection of peoples. How do you see yourself functioning, let's say, in the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, I made a conscious effort to share and to communicate and to build a tribe around people. And really, there's 5 things for me on my community that matter and that I look for. And one is I want to get greater emotional resilience. I want to have, the ability to adapt and to see other people's point of views and change, the way I see the world through their lens too, and be open-minded. Number 2 is I think that people who do share those experiences and are willing to be vulnerable have a higher long-term success rate. And so you can define success, however, whether it's family, corporate America, retirement, quality of life. 3 for me is I have better health outcomes. I feel less stressed. if I can share that experience and be vulnerable, then I feel healthier. My blood pressure, everything within me kind of relaxes a little bit. Number 4 for me would be just a stronger leadership capacity. If I share that story or others share that story with me, and especially young people, I feel like that, they're like, hey, I'm not in this alone. Other people have been on this day, had this issue, whatever that might be, and it'll make them a stronger leader, I think, as they grow older. And then my 5th thing that I think, if I was going through it, I was thinking, man, I have the greater ability to overcome adversity because I'm not alone. So I think this is catastrophic. In reality, is I've talked to 3 people in the last month that have been in that same road, in that same situation. And so sharing that kind of relaxes you and think, okay, I will be alive tomorrow. I will be able to overcome that. And I think I'm going to have, on the other side, it's going to be far better and positive outlook.
As regards these aspects of communities you lined out as being of general importance for the very existence plus the survival of a community, when you see this against the frame of, let's say, an existing consume-oriented system that favors the individual maximization of consume. And when this is enhanced, as Grant once said it, by a kind of recent voyeurist capitalism, as unregulated free market forces, the law of the strongest, there is no sense for community, just for individual right and strengths, and for individual consume. Also, if you see this as a general background, I'm over exaggerating. I'm just drawing a picture. If this is the background, the scenery we all are living in today, how we can rebuild and re-establish a very understanding of what humane community is.
Well, for me, it is a tough issue. It is a long haul, and it's something that doesn't happen overnight. It's something that's going to be built, but it's built with others. And so for me, I see humanity, again, going back to finding people that have an understanding and ability, and they're humble and say, okay, I don't have this figured out. Please share your experiences and stories and be open-minded. And so for me, really character, communities must be built on trust, in my opinion. And trust grows when people do the right thing when no one else is watching. So they're not a politician and they're not playing to the audience. They actually act that way in the darkness. So in the darkness, they're the same in the daylight. And so I think trust is the highest form for human motivation, for bringing people together. And I think commitment, or I think real community, it really shows up in the most difficult times. So when somebody's having a bad, fall, somebody else has had an unsuccessful, outcome of a project or work, or gets laid off, then I think commitment, that's where resilience is born. And you have that community, and you surround, and humanity shows up and they pick you up. And then courage, for me, great communities, they encourage other people who face adversities and to take that on and don't avoid it. Address that issue. Don't put it under the pillow or sweep it under the floor. Address it head on and understand that I'm here to help you. There's a saying in Proverbs, iron sharpens iron, and one person can sharpen another.
I think the relation you mentioned between commitment and resilience is very important. When you have commitment, at least in my eyes, when you have commitment, you have also purpose. No? And when you have commitment and purpose, you can be resilient also as a group, as a community, or not?
Yes.
Okay.
So, like under the, if you look at the stress levels that people are living under today, for instance, on all levels, because we know we're in a world that's in major transitions. Do you think that the best way to release this stress is through community?
Absolutely. I think that it's all based on humanity and bringing us together. I think that, sharing that experience, being vulnerable, being open, I think that's what matters most. And I think another thing we have to do is we have to be intentional. When we intentionally build our communities, like we just talked about, based on character, courage, and our commitment, I think we will create a resilient environment. And I think that becomes contagious. As you said, people share those experiences, positive and negative. We share more of those positive experiences. I think that building a community can be contagious, and it can be resilient if done with the right mentality and surrounded by the right people.
I mean, with the where you live in the Midwestern United States, do you find, let's say, because I'm sure you travel, so like, let's say you go to New York City, you go to Los Angeles, you go to Paris, whatever city you're going to, do you find in smaller communities a better formula for success in resilience?
I think in smaller communities, you're more exposed. And so I think you take on that identity of your local community. Most of the communities that I travel to and see and have family where we visit in the Midwest are much smaller and very conservative. So if you go into those communities, for example, you and I, we just talked about technology. They won't allow children to have handheld devices, phones, or anything else in their schools. So they had to take it all the way to the state level to get a law and ordinance passed that says we're not going to allow those devices. They're a distraction. They deter communication. They don't allow people, to actually communicate via their words and their actions. And so I think smaller communities, that's where it starts. They say, no, we want a sense of communicating with each other, not going around through an outside cloud device, then back into that classroom. So I think they understand it. Larger communities, obviously, you bring in several different backgrounds of people, and you bring in several different viewpoints. And so I think it's much more difficult. And I know, it seems like, especially in the Midwest, the rural towns in their conservative outlook and approach takes on a whole new meaning when it comes to that every 4 years when you have to elect a leader. So that leader, maybe from your state, seems to have more of a reflection of the urban environment. And so they are much more, we ought to try this and help this and that. And the smaller communities are like, what's in it for me? Because that's what matters most. And so maybe that's a different mindset.
I think it's more of a provincial mindset, wouldn't you think? Sort of more provincial. Yeah. I mean, if we look at the big cities, let's say Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, just to mention a few, in your point of view, the inner city, the central cores of the city, we've seen a lot of vacancies. We've seen a lot of society moving out of the central core, which started with COVID, of course, because of people working from home and everything. But do you see the central core with the congestion problems, with the traffic flow not being right, with not enough green space, if I can use that terminology? Do you think that there's a deterioration in major cities?
Yes, I think that people, and I have a couple of young adults in my life. I have a 32-year-old and a 27-year-old. And I will tell you that they absolutely, my 32-year-old, I'll use him for example, has no desire to be in a congested urban environment and raise his family. And his mindset is, I want to get less noise, less traffic, less this, less that. So in his world, in his mind, is I get more of those things I need out in the suburban environment. And he relocated his wife and child, and they're in a very suburban area because of the distractions and the noise and everything. And so I think you're starting to see some of that trend where young people, they like the connections, but they want to do it in a smaller, more conservative environment.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a trend?
Oh, I think so. I think especially around, the areas that I traveled to, I see even, let's just, the one way to gauge growth in population is through schools. So the largest school districts in the Midwest here, let's just use Kansas and Missouri. The largest school districts in the state of Kansas and Missouri are not the urban core, it's the suburban subdivision communities. So for example, in like a Kansas City, that's kind of a bordering metropolitan area. The Kansas City, Missouri Public School District has seen a decline in enrollment consecutively now for the past 2 decades. If you look at where those students are going to public schools, because they don't have open enrollment in the Midwest, you have to go to the school in your subdivision. And so the largest school districts are actually the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. And so the same thing would happen on the Kansas side. The Kansas side, the fastest growing school districts aren't the urban school districts, they are the suburbs.
But when we look at the city again, also the city as an entity, and if we take classical Western concepts of the community and human conditions, going back to the Greek, they said, for instance, Aristotle said, the human being essentially is a zoon politikon. It's an animal on the one hand, like other animals, but it's an animal living in the city and the polis. And the polis was a city of communities where the citizens could take common decisions and participate in molding their city as an ideal. If you look at this Western basic, let's say, idea in the background of what is a good city, a good citizen, and if we compare this with the existing urban agglomerations, how a humane city and communities today, in the way you outlined communities, how these communities today could live or be re-established in existing urban agglomerations?
Well, I think first of all, you need to create an environment that's open and inviting to others. For example, if you want to create and bring people back into urban environments, and you gotta create open space. They want to have activities that you can participate in outside, whether that's parks and recreation, whether that's some sort of open festival environment. People want a walkable community. People want to bike, so open up, leisure trails so that we can share those open spaces with people on bicycles, people that want to walk, recreate that market so that you have people who can come into like a farmer's market and buy fresh food, fresh produce, make that available, encourage those connections, encourage the activities. If you want to bring younger people in that have children that are in the kindergarten through 12th grade environment, then you're going to have to create a stronger school system with activities. There's got to be activities that encourage involvement, participation. I think the fastest youth sport right now in America is soccer. So to create soccer, you're going to have to create a park. You're going to have to create fields. You're going to have to create environments where it's easily accessible. It's walkable. People are encouraged to be outside. All of that is in the works, and you have to create it. And oh, by the way, the overlying thing is you have to have good, safe environment. So you got to have to make sure that your crime rates are low, your police department's fully funded, fully staffed. You have to make sure that you have public transportation, because not everyone wants to own 2 and 3 cars like they do in the suburbs. So you got to make it walkable. You got to create some community, light rail. People want to be green. People want to be clean. So they don't want to be down there creating smog and all of that. I think creating that healthy environment is going to take all 3 of those.
Okay.
So if we were to wrap this up, what is in your mind what you view as your greatest desire for the future?
My greatest desire for the future would be to, parallel what some of the rural communities are doing and limit the access to devices. Let's go back to pre-cell phone. Let's go back to pre-laptop. It doesn't have to be landlines and box computers, allow them to have access for learning. I think that part has to be moderated so that children understand, like you and I are communicating today. You're in Germany, I'm in the United States. What a wonderful experience for young people to be able to connect like we're connecting today. But to say we're going to do that and that's our primary purpose and that's a 6, 7, 8 hour event, that can't be done. If that's an hour or 2 hour event and it's world history or it's whatever you want to, label it and call it, I think it has to be moderated. But I do encourage connection, especially with other communities around the world, not just around the United States.
Okay. Well, we want to thank Ron Cox for being here. Thank you for your inputs. We appreciate it. And we wish you the best of luck with everything. Yeah.